Hello again, Zachary.
Hello again, Vance.
Or should I say Balazar?
Thank you.
I wanted to talk about the Dungeon Master CEO this
Okay.
week.
All right.
So you've got the experience as both,
Yeah.
and let's just take a little trip down memory lane for you. Hypothetically, imagine that you are getting into D&D when you're also in the middle of building your own business, building your own career, helping people figure out their careers. What are you learning about dungeon mastering? Like, what are some of the first things that a new dungeon master is going to
Mm. Yeah. So dungeon masters are interesting because you're running everything. You're used to, if you're a player before, you're used to like whatever that class is. Now you're thinking about the world building, you're thinking about the campaign or the one shot, you're thinking about the how the player is going to respond. You have to kind of know all the mechanics of the game, rules as written. There's just a lot involved in up leveling to a DM.
So there's a lot of people who would encounter a board game, just a board game, right? Not like TTRPG, but just a board game. And their experience of going through the rules is like an exercise in zoning out. You're struggling hard to pay attention to this.
Yeah.
And this is my wife. When we try to do like a board game night, it's like we don't want to be spending 30 minutes learning how to play the game, right? We
Yeah.
want something we can kind of dive into.
Yeah. That's true.
And I imagine that's going to be the case for a lot of people who would be a good dungeon master. So, what do you say to the overwhelm when there's so much learning curve?
Yeah. So I'll say this. I recently ran a how to DM workshop for some player characters, like players in my party. And two or three of them showed up for it and asked great questions. And I sort of took more of a coach approach to it. And I said, hey, like, what questions do you have? Here's some of the like headings and, details that I'm talking about that I'm planning on writing in a for fun book on how to be a great dungeon master that is yet to be published. So that said, I would say that their questions, nothing's standing out to me as being like particularly challenging. Um, but it's just like the collective, you need to be able to do so many different pieces. One way you can make it easier on yourself as a new DM is by not having to deal with things like maps or images, right? Like maybe use a scripted book instead of coming up with your own homebrewed campaign or whatnot, unless you really like the homebrew element. For me, I just, and then especially if you're doing it, start with a one shot, don't necessarily run a campaign. Or if you run a campaign, make sure it's a short one because it gets challenging. And one of the biggest challenges for me consistently, even with like the one shot that I ran for us recently, was timing and pacing, right? So like you pretty much have time for one combat session, maybe two, depending,
Yeah.
but like there's just not a lot of time. Granted, I think part of the challenge for me in the last one shot was 11 players, not four. So that's its own bit of
let's
insanity.
let's talk about that one a little bit before
Okay,
we go back to the
sure.
broader conversation. I was there, so I got to witness the chaos here.
Yeah. And this is your second one shot that you sat in as a player for
I've
with
had
me.
two very different one shot
Yeah,
experiences with
they
you,
were
and
pretty
I've been on
different.
the other side. I've run one shots
Yes.
myself and I'll talk about that format as well later.
Yeah.
So first one shot with you, we had 5 players.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, and that's like the right number.
Yeah,
Basically, you want
it
four
is.
to six
Yeah.
players before you start to. It's too many turns to cycle through,
Yeah.
and people want to think about it on their turn,
Yeah.
and you're just waiting game. This time you had 11 players,
Mm-hmm.
so entirely your fault for inviting that many people,
Oh, for
right?
sure. I
Okay.
will own that. And it was hilarious. It was great. Like it was chaotic though.
It was very chaotic. It was really funny. You could see like like conversations developing in pockets of players. Everyone did a great job of giving each other space to
Yeah.
talk. That was something I was kind of surprised by pleasantly was
Yeah.
you had so many people who were ostensibly having to wait their turn. One of the things that naturally developed was like in combat, you have this initiative system that determines your turn. Everyone rolls for initiative, and that's like the order that you're going to go, who reacts first as a character. But outside of combat, you didn't have that. It just didn't matter.
Yeah.
And that's what, like, oh, that kind of worked. Like, everyone is just raising their hand almost
Yeah.
and just chiming in, and people are waiting, like, do you have an idea? Do you have an idea? And whoever has an idea just speaks out.
Yeah.
And it worked.
It worked. And
Yeah.
part of why I think it worked too was there were times when I would say like you, then you. And it's like these are elements that I pull from my facilitation work
Yeah.
in my professional life that I think play very much to being able to improv and manage a room. And I'm frequently in trainings or rooms where I'm managing 10, 12, sometimes 20, even 40 people, and trying to have a
Yeah.
conversation with them. And this is essentially what D&D is it's a conversation. You're telling a story together collaboratively.
You're letting people guide the conversation.
Right.
You're guiding how they guide it.
Yes, it is a sort of meta skill, right?
Right. It's like nudging, but you don't want to have the hand too tightly on the steering wheel.
Yeah.
So that 11-person one shot, what'd you take away? Like, were there any lessons that you have?
Well, I think you're right. It might have been valuable to break it into two where there's two smaller groups. So that would have been helpful from like a just time standpoint. We also had two people in the room who'd never played D&D before. So that was a particularly like interesting crash course for them.
Yeah.
And I think they really enjoyed it. Granted, that was maybe not representative of the classic experience, but maybe a little bit in terms of the chaos and humor.
Yeah.
And I did not expect to throw a challenge rating 17 creature at you guys, because while I'd had the idea of a Dracolith, actually what I envisioned was that moment in Skyrim where you're going through one of the temples and it's like an moment where you're just like, what is this giant bony dragon racing towards me? It's funny because like in Skyrim, you're the Dragonborn, you're taking down dragons repeatedly, but then suddenly you're in a cavern and skeletons are rushing you with a Dracolith, and you're like, what is happening?
Yeah.
So I wanted to get some of that like shock and awe that people would experience.
You almost killed us.
And
we were going around like, wait, we're cooked.
One breath weapon from the dragon, and almost everyone was gone.
I had 61 health. That was my max health. He just did 64 health of damage. I was like, if Silronge next to me hadn't given us a little bit
aid,
of extra,
right? The boost, yeah.
I'm sitting there with like 3 health left.
Yeah. And of course,
my turn hasn't even happened.
As a DM, I've calculated that, right? So like, I'm like, generally speaking, you're at level 10, you should be able to like take 60 points of damage.
Yeah.
And I rolled a little high on that one, so 64. I think it would have been like, 40s or 50s. But yeah, it was like, okay, I wanted you to feel as players the terror of like, wow, like, can we do this?
Yeah.
And then to be able to pull through that, and like everyone levels all their attacks. And I sort of probably, metagamed a little bit and was like, just attack, because everyone was like trying to heal.
Yeah, you can't heal.
But like necrotic damage and legendary action says you can't heal. So anyway, I probably should have looked at the NPC, the monster specs.
I think like 3 people wasted their turns trying to heal. Each one be like, you can't heal right now.
That's okay.
So you tried to heal, but it didn't
But then
work.
you had folks that are pulling out like 80 damage per turn because they have specialty weapons and stuff. Yeah. So like, one of those was a homebrewed ring of basically sunburst, sunlight, sunbeam.
So this is an interesting point for this one shot. You had a mix of folks. You had people who had literally never experienced D&D before.
All the way to like people who had started with me when I was a first player.
They had characters
3 years ago
that were already built up.
Yeah.
You were referencing stuff in their inventory from the campaign they're doing elsewhere. With you.
Yeah. And I've run I've run one campaign as a DM. I'd been a part of a player campaign, and then we'd also had like 3 one-shots. So there were elements where like they got items and stuff along the way, and they're bringing that into their, inventory and with their characters, even if they're like legendary items. So it was kind of a cool.
There's something there I want to like poke at just for a second about inclusion. With kind of different cohorts or cycles of people coming in. When you think about building any sort of team that has long-term responsibilities, you can run into this problem. Like some people hold knowledge and experience and stories, and they've got relationships built, and then you get fresh blood who comes in, and you've got to find a good way to include them.
Yeah, for me, the inclusion is never hard. You might say I'm designing for inclusion from the beginning. And that's even a part of how I run the group coaching program / leadership development program I have in my work. Is it's ongoing, it's continuous, it's evergreen. So someone will be a part of the program from the beginning. They've been in it for 6 months. Someone new walks in day 1. They're both going to get value from that conversation, from that experience, or in the case of D&D, from that story.
We saw people kind of teaching each other,
which was awesome. And that's like totally what
your neighbor next to you knows what.
That's right. Yeah. And that's totally what I think is normal to expect in a D&D context, but also especially around the kind of table that I've cultivated. I've tried to make it where, it's just we're bringing people and keeping people who are supportive of one another, and they're, happy to help out. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I noticed that we had Silveron next to me and a bard, dancing
Goob.
bard. Yeah,
Yes.
Goob, right? Who could forget Goob? And they were helping each other out, look through the player's handbook, like, what can I do? We
Nice.
had different styles of players. There were some who were more rules oriented and wanted to
Uh-huh.
get the math right, and
Yeah.
others who were really just there for the improv,
Yeah.
the role play, like not going to look at a piece of paper the whole time,
You're right.
right? And they were both fine.
Yeah.
It was perfectly appropriate.
Well, and funny that we're talking about this because one of my first experience with a TTRPG was a one shot I did where a friend was just like, "Hey, I'm going after work to this like board game type thing. Do you want to come?" And I said, "Sure." And it turns out it was Star Wars themed, which was great because Star Wars was my favorite fandom at the time. And this was back in, I want to say 2014 or 2013 that I did this. So I had this early experience, and the DM or game master in this context had like 8 or 9 of us around the table. And like it worked really well. And there was no rule book, there were no character sheets. It was just like, what do you want to do? Describe your character's backstory and
Yeah.
let's go. And so I think that kind of fluidity and that kind of experience is what set the tone for me on I can make the chaotic work, plus all the background and experience I have of improving in the sense of being a coach, facilitator, trainer.
Yeah.
At this point, it's fairly second nature for me. And I more welcome the chaos than I'm surprised by it. And back to the point about inclusivity, I would rather say, hey, come on in, join us, even though it makes it a little crazier, but it, I think, makes it just as much fun, if not more fun for more people,
Yeah.
as opposed to like, nope, we've hit our limit. There's 6 is a hard cap and
It's
we
a
can't do
balance.
this.
Yeah.
So, should I have gone beyond 11? I mean, probably, like you said, probably could have said not 11. I was playing the numbers a little bit because I was thinking, what if we have people drop out day
Right.
of or whatever,
Right.
but like pretty much everyone still came. So in that case, it
Good
worked.
problem.
It's a great problem to have.
Good, yeah.
And I think, the next time I do it, I might suggest, hey, like, let's run 2 of these. One's going to be like, for 6 people, one's going to be for 6 people. And then we'll just, if you want to come and play through it twice, fine. But like, if you want to play through it once, you get your preferred time and I'll just run it twice.
Yeah.
Something like that might be a pivot as to how I would adapt for the future.
When you talk about approaching DMing for the first time, and breaking it into smaller pieces, you say maybe run a shorter campaign or a one shot.
Yeah.
Maybe don't bother with all the maps and all the nice to haves. Keep it simpler. What's coming to my mind, because I see everything through this lens of human-centered design and design thinking, I'm like, oh, just prototyping, right? Like run through a prototype.
Exactly.
And I've done this format where I wanted to strip it down as much as possible to make it not overwhelming for players, right? Like I'm designing for my wife who does not want to spend 30 minutes doing the rules. So we got to have a quick preparation time. And the thing that I came up with was a asymmetrical horror slasher tabletop experience where we have 5 friends. One of them gets to be the movie monster, the killer, whomever, and the other 4 are going to be survivors. And the simplest setup, like the MVP that we could do was you've got one objective, which is probably escape, right? You've got one strength and you've got one weakness for your character.
Yeah.
To give them a quirk.
Yep.
And that's it. That's all people had to really write down. They don't have to keep track of all these different stats and health and whatnot. Just be like, what's something that my character is really good at? What's something that is kind of a weakness? Make it funny. You could do 2 if you're pushing it, right? 2 strengths, 2 weaknesses, a little more to keep track of. And all I would do, we would use the dice to roll and see, 1 is critical failure, 20 is a critical success, everything in between. And then if you were doing something related to a strength or a weakness, it would give disadvantage or advantage. Pretty simplified, right?
Yeah.
And it got to be super focused on the story. When I've run these, I've done probably 4 or 5 of them thus far. They're very hilarious. They kind of feel like you're experiencing a movie and directing it at the same time.
Yeah,
and people get into their characters. So something I might recommend to aspiring D&D
DMs
leader, is just try stripping it down. Like you don't have to figure out the whole thing up front.
Yep. You can always add in the maps later, or you can delegate that, which is what I did for my campaign.
Right.
Was I was like, hey, you seem like you're excited about this and you're willing to help me out with this. Why don't you figure out how to get the maps like chopped up? I'll print them at my, convenience, but like we'll come together collaboratively, tape them all and whatever else. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
So talk more about delegation.
Yeah,
Something I'm curious to see a parallel with for
sure.
our careers and our businesses.
Yeah.
If we're thinking about businesses, even just if we're like an independent contractor
Right.
starting shop, with DMing, you have the player's handbook.
Yes.
You've got maps, you've got die, you've got characters and campaigns and stories and NPCs and monsters and loot and special enchantments. All that stuff is like you can just draw from it. It's overwhelming
Hmm.
how many resources are out there
Yeah.
to get you a prefab.
Yep.
Is there anything like that for us
As a DM.
in real life?
Oh, in real life.
I want
Yeah.
to start, building my career. I want to step out and gain some independence, whether it's a W-2 role or I want to, set up shop independently or grow my small business. Where's that? Like,
Yeah.
how can I delegate some of those I don't know what to do's?
Yeah. Oof. Uh, I would say that one of the most complex problems we face as humans is how do you navigate a career? And it's a 40, 50-year endeavor for a lot of us. And there's not a silver bullet or a simple answer. And so I tend to lean on some general principles. I would say one of the ways to do that is to network, find those mentors or sponsors who are going to open doors for you, help you think about things, um, find the partners, people who you share alignment with in terms of values. And then, kind of that human centered side of it is just,
So right there, you might have already lost some people
okay,
who are going, ooh, networking.
yeah, and
Right?
so I'm not thinking of it primarily as networking. I'm thinking about it as our mutual friend Ed DeJesus would say social capital, or I might say more along the lines of like, what's your support system,
Yeah.
right? Like you think about, in the way this is a great D&D parallel actually. Your character has some like slots in terms of like you can wear like shoes and like armor and a helmet and some of those other things like gloves,
Gear
right?
slots,
Gear
equipment
slots
slots.
essentially, right?
Yeah.
So, but you can think about like your quote unquote character sheet for yourself as a person developing a career. You've got some support slots that may or may not be filled. And if you're to think about like what are the roles or the support that we need, right? Like it could be as simple as like a barber. It could be as complicated or deep and advanced as a therapist. But like we have friends
Get your
play
therapy.
roles.
Get your therapy, folks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. We have friends, we have family, we have those mentors, we have peers. Like I think about navigating my career. One of the ways I got a job was by talking to friends of mine, right? And they were already in that company, and they said, let's help you get in there.
Yeah.
In another case, it was a mentor and a former boss that I'd worked for who said, "Hey, I'm ready to replace someone, and I'd like to have you work for me." Right? So like that became mentor turned sponsor overnight. Um, and then I've had other opportunities where people have opened doors for me, um, given me access to resources and to training and education that I wouldn't have had. So you can almost think about like what are those like support slots that I'd want to fill. Maybe almost like if you are the main character and you're bringing that main character energy, who are the other party members who are playing other roles? Like you don't want to go into a fight against a tough BBEG without a cleric
Oh, what?
supporting you. The BBEG,
What was that?
the big bad evil guy,
Oh,
like
yeah.
the main
Okay.
bad guy of the campaign, right?
The big
Like
bad.
the
Yeah.
big bad. Yeah, you
Yeah.
don't want to go up against one of those without a cleric or some sort of like healer,
Yeah.
right? Typically, so I would say that might be another way of thinking about the support. It's not networking; it's about who's your party, like who are you playing with, and that goes to like my paradigm around careers, which is that we play it as a competitive game, but it's a collaborative one. It's
Yeah.
a co-op because if we're not actually getting support from others in our career, we're actually like trying to solo a campaign that's probably above our level in a lot of
Yeah.
cases.
Yeah.
And that's to bring an entrepreneurial lens to it. Typically, where a lot of new entrepreneurs wake up and realize, "Wow, I've been doing this wrong," is they try to do it themselves too long and they don't lean on support, resources, mentorship. Um,
Yeah,
or
that's
partners
huge.
for too
We
long.
try to face things alone
Yeah.
way too often.
Don't solo the dungeon,
Yeah.
right? Like try to actually build that team of party members, or if you're thinking about it as gear slots, right? Like who helps you think things through, who helps you with your feet get mobility to go through the doors that you need to go through, who's like helping you with the emotional support and that armor to protect you from
Yeah.
the brutality of what is trying to like get a new job and that kind of thing sometimes. So yeah, there's some real importance I think to the people, and that's why I tend to start there. Is that there are tips, tricks, practical tools, strategies, and all that. But if you're missing the people, the support team, you're soloing the dungeon.
So I asked, what's the player's handbook for our career? And your answer was basically, it's not the player's handbook. It's having the friend who's like willing to guide you through
Right.
the player's handbook.
In a sense, yeah, it's like what you were describing earlier, where we have new people to the party, but like people were leaning in and talking about it and helping them figure it out. Right. Yeah. So like, yes, there is a player's handbook. And I would say in that sense, I'm actually currently writing a player's handbook in the career sense, a guide for young professionals on how to advance in their career. And so this won't be exhaustive, but it'll be like a quick start guide to help any young professional gain some value, figure out how to navigate certain aspects of their career that will be challenging. And so, there are resources out there. There are books. There's one that just came out this week, in fact, last week, about different scripts that you can use by Aaron Mickoff, different scripts that you can use to like solve some of the challenges, like how do you navigate a negotiation, or how do you navigate a raise, or how do you fill in the blank there.
Okay.
I've just picked up the book, haven't read it yet.
Negotiation's an excellent skill.
But exactly, right? Yeah. So like there are conversations that we need to have in our careers. Yeah. And unless you know kind of how to have the conversation, then that's going to be a problem. And I think that's her point from some of what she's posted online about it, is that, she's tired of seeing people fail to have these conversations in the ways that they need to be successful in their careers. And so like that's one of the things that I'm hoping to do is, provide essentially a player's handbook or a quick start guide to help people see what it is that they need to do differently. And some of that's going to lean heavily on like my philosophy for navigating a career, things like, lean into your people, build your player characters, companions, your party members, and so on and so forth.
So a mindset shift that I might have as a growing young professional is, it's less about finding the materials to figure this out on my own. It's less about, surrounding myself with the armor and the weapons and the gear. And it's more about finding the people, the suppliers, the teachers, the mentors, the guides.
I mean, I would say in 99% of the time, that's true, right? There are probably rare cases where you're going to need to know the skills. You're going to need to know, whatever you're going to do, you're going to do it on your own. I'm sure there are those cases out there, but almost every time, you can think about this when you're building a business, right? Like people go out for loans, people go out for investors, right? They're looking for business partners, they're looking for employees. It's all about people. And so unless you're finding those people, and I'll just kind of paint this in the context of a solo campaign, right? I was running on generative AI. We talked a little bit about this last time. Like one of the player characters, so it's my main is a wizard, Balasar, and he's risen to this level of like significant power within this campaign. He's an archmage now, but he still doesn't solo everything. Yeah. Sometimes he'll bring in other people when you're going up against major threats. And because I happen to like wizards so much, I'm pulling in Mordekainen and Elminster, which are two of the like legendary archmages in the D&D realm, but as NPCs. Mordekainen, I think, was actually the player character of one of the founders of D&D. And then Elminster is basically the Gandalf from Lord of the Rings in the D&D multiverse. So, you've got these incredibly powerful wizards, and you tap into them, their wisdom and their spell abilities. They're going to stop time for you. They're going to rain meteors down on your enemies. Like, you can kind of one-shot some crazy bosses if you have the right team. And that's where I think, it gets to be really fun when you have those connections.
So, there's a little bit of, don't go it alone.
Yeah.
That could be a lesson that we have to hear over and over and over again. Anytime you go to solve a new problem, I think that instinct is to just hit up Google, or now it's maybe a GPT and you're asking the questions, or hit the library. It could be good. Go to the database and find out like, what are the resources? Find the people. How do I find the right people to be those guides and mentors and like first introductions? You say networking can feel kind of fake, can feel contrived for a lot of people. If you're introverted, it's emotionally exhausting to go out and network. So what to do?
Yeah, like how do you start those conversations or talk to those people?
And how do you find those early advocates for your growth?
Yeah, advocates is a good word for it too. And not everyone is going to come into this with like high relational skills or desire to have a relational approach to navigating their career. That's my default because I care about people. I care about seeing them succeed, right? That kind of comes through in the work that I've chosen as a coach and trainer. Again, there's not one way to kind of design or manage a career or navigate it. And you may find that the relationship approach or the relational approach just isn't for you, isn't your default. In that case, I might lean more heavily into, building the skills or finding ways to, strategically get doors opened, play the odds, some of those types of things. Like one of the interesting stats I read in a book for job hunters, about 5 years ago was you're only going to get a job 4% of the time when you're applying online. But if you walk your resume into a company and drop it off, that jumps up to 28%. And so like, there's some strategies that you can employ that are just better if you know where to look and how to find those stats and do that kind of stuff.
And I'd argue that relational skills aren't optional.
Sure.
You can lean more into it or say, I
Yeah.
want to work with my disposition, my personality.
Yeah.
Well, what are the fundamentals? Like, you've got to do at least this. You
Yeah.
don't have to go to a networking event with 500 people, schmoozing, but you've got to find some kind of hub, some kind of group to get involved with, or are there places to just meet people directly and say, hey, I need a little guidance here?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, this is part of why people engage coaches, right? That they might want some support.
Yeah.
If you're looking at like, I always suggest mentors as a starting place for young professionals because you can always find people older than you as a young professional. And very often when you ask them point blank, hey, would you give me advice? They're willing to do that. And they look at you and they see them a little bit of themselves in the younger version, that younger version of themselves. And so they're willing to kind of share, even if it's just briefly in that moment, something that's helpful for them, was helpful for them, that might be helpful for you. But oftentimes if you ask them, hey, would you mentor me? They might come back with, well, what did you have in mind? Or what would that look like? But it's almost flattering to be asked.
That's true. People like sharing what they know.
And a lot of times I would assume that someone who wants to be a mentor or who would be open to being a mentor, they'll not answer with an immediate no, but they'll be looking for ways to say yes, right? Like, because let's be honest, we don't get asked a whole lot to be mentors. And specifically, I'm thinking in unpaid mentorship, right? Which some people may not realize there's also paid mentorship.
Yeah.
But if you're going to ask someone like, hey, would you mentor me? I can probably count on one hand the number of times I've gotten asked that question.
Yeah.
Right. And nowadays, if I'm getting asked that, I'm going to be running it through a stricter filter, being a father and not having a lot of capacity. Right. I might encourage them to, steer towards one of the group coaching programs. Maybe I'd cut them a special deal. Right. But like, I'm definitely excited about developing people. And I think that will be, that's a strategy that 95% of the time, the young professional self-selects out instead of getting told no. Mm-hmm. And so like, I've even talked about this within a coaching session with a client before, right? If she's looking to like, hey, can the CEO of my company mentor me, right? Like, she faces a lot of internal resistance around saying, let me go and ask her to mentor me. And like, is that weird? Is that, under what context is that culturally okay? Right? Even if it like looks like it is, still like there's a lot of internal resistance that we as young professionals feel to make that kind of ask, when honestly, like, it's one of the most powerful things you can do is to ask a board member or executive to say like, hey, can you help me out? Even if it's just once a quarter.
So you brought up something that I think people really need to internalize, which is you got to ask for what you need.
Yeah.
Right. Ask for what you need. That's been one of the great insights with businesses and nonprofits that I've worked with that just weren't doing that. Mm-hmm. They have these needs and they're just like, I have to figure it out on my own. Yeah. I've got to dig into my paycheck. I've got to dig into my savings. I got to dig into my retirement fund. I've got to dig into my time, figure it all out. And you just don't. It doesn't work very well either. So learning that habit of asking for what you need. Yeah. Because the insight that you'll then get if you start building that habit is no is fine. Getting to know is absolutely fine. So you were highlighting something. If you're asked today, like, hey, would you mind mentoring me? I want to build my career. You might say, well, honestly, no, I don't have the bandwidth to do that. But you would immediately be looking at who could I introduce this young person to?
Mm-hmm.
And that would be the same for me. I may not have the bandwidth to add another regular slot to my calendar, but I know people who I can introduce you to, and that's going to be my first reflex is, well, where could I point you?
Yeah.
Is there a resource hub I can point you toward? Is there a grant I can tell you about? Is there an introduction I can make for you? And then it's like, you may get no, and no is fine. Keep asking. And then you may get no's, but here's something else instead. So a fun lesson that I learned when I was doing kind of constituent casework in a different context, I was like a chief of staff. And this was just local government. We're just serving constituent cases. And it runs the gamut. Like someone installed a mirror that I can't see around in my driveway, all the way up to like I'm being denied disability claims, and just help people work through this stuff. I wouldn't have the answers for all of the questions that they'd ask, but I had all these numbers around my desk, all these business cards and like flyers for the organizations that I can point people toward when I don't have the answer, or even like go up the chain and go from our office to another jurisdiction up and say, well, that office might be able to help you with this. So I got so used to doing that, I started practicing it myself and realizing the people answering these phones may not have the answers, but they typically have a number. And when I started practicing that, it was a little funny. I would be like, you know what? I have no idea who I need to talk to in this organization for like a sale or prospecting or job or whatever I'm trying to find, recruiting, customer discovery interviews. Let me just call someone. And they would invariably send me where I needed to go.
Yeah.
You know? And then I'm just looking for the no. I'm like, okay, you're probably not the right person to talk to, but who should I ask about this? Like, can you introduce me to the right person here? Who should I be talking to?
Yeah.
And I get it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
It's like,
brilliant.
oh.
That's great, because so often, again, if people, I would say, maybe this is overstating it, but 80, maybe 90% of people are going to be willing to help you, going to look for ways to do that. Like, we're in a service economy. Almost everyone's used to doing that professionally anyway. Never mind, most of us are positively intentioned people. So we're going to like look to support and help. And so like,
And we got to rub off the ones that don't.
sure,
Right?
for
Just
sure.
roll.
Yeah, right. And like, you're always going to run into folks who are just, not going to be a good fit in that regard. But recognizing that, and this is one of the mindset pieces, if you are going for a job, right? Like, this employer in front of you may not be a fit for you, but there are millions of other employers looking for people,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to be a fit for someone.
Yeah.
And it kind of does come down to like, how many times are you willing to make the call? Or in the case of mentorship, like, how many people are you willing to ask until you find like the mentors who are meeting you where you need to be? Because maybe it is that you talk to several people and that's not a fit, and they say no, they don't have capacity, whatever. At what point do you stop? Versus do you say like, hey, like, I'm going to run into someone like Vance or Zachary who's going to at least resource me and point me in the right direction, let alone they may have the capacity and desire to help me. So
yeah, in video games or tabletop campaigns, you might have a setting that, if you've played these games long enough, you'll run into something where you need to investigate the room and find the next clue. And it'll be like, okay, so I go and I look under this box, and I go and I check behind the painting, and I go and look inside that book, and you just keep checking all the places. When you're in the game, you just check until you run out of options.
Right.
You just keep going.
Yeah.
Because you're in a context where there is an answer.
Yeah.
100%.
The completionist in me loves that.
Right.
Because, yeah.
So I'll hit up every single NPC
right.
in the town square, be like, do you know where I can go? Do you know where did you see this person coming through? But then in real life, you can replicate that if you just have the confidence that someone has the answer.
Yeah.
And that's where maybe we drop out.
Yeah.
We don't ask everyone around us. Mm-hmm. We don't check every available resource because we don't have that faith in ourselves or the confidence that, like, in my community, in my support system, in the people around me, someone is going to have that introduction, the right introduction for me.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the most brilliant exercises that I've seen and read about comes from the book Rejection Proof. I think it's Alex Pang. And he did an experiment to be rejected 100 days in a row,
mm-hmm.
right? 100 days of rejection. And it's just amazing for him how many times people were like, well, I can't really do that, but let me see how I can, or see how I can help you, right? And like, he would make these ridiculous asks that were a definite no. And sometimes they'd still find ways to make it a yes. Right. And so, and never mind just the practice of like being able to like handle that level of rejection, right, is ultimately what you need if you're navigating your career and your job hunting right now. Like
Yeah.
that's going to be par for the course. So practice in getting to have enough of the conversations. In the sales mindset, you got to get what 4 no's to get a yes or something like that. So you just becomes a numbers game. And I think if more young professionals thought about it this way, it would be like, let me keep saying yes until I get to that answer, to that right outcome, as opposed to let me just bail after I did it once and I failed.
And the way that you build up that rejection proof armor, you're basically building up self-esteem,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is a sense of security.
Yeah.
The I am enough,
Mm-hmm.
the I can handle it,
Sure.
right? And building your self-esteem, I think, can be done design thinking mindset, prototyping. Let's give ourselves quick wins. Let's give ourselves small, repeatable wins,
Mm-hmm.
because I want to build up the I can moments.
Yeah.
I want to overcome small challenges, and then a little bit larger, and then a little bit larger. And you can do that in like safer, lower stakes environments
Yeah.
if you're trying to venture into a new space. Let's say we have a skill, we have a craft that we're really good at, and we want to go independent with it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we've been like in a W-2 environment. We want to start our own shop. Well, we're really good at this thing that we do. I'm really good at an IT consulting, or I'm really good at baking cakes, or I'm really good at taking care of cars, whatever this skill is.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean I'm good at the business thing. That's going to be new, foreign, scary.
Yeah.
Like I've got to learn this whole new set of skills.
Right.
So I can find lower stakes ways to test this out and give myself those wins, because I want to
Mm-hmm.
build up my sense of self-esteem, the I can feeling,
Yeah.
so that any given situation, I may not know the answer right now, but I want my mind to go to I can handle it,
Yeah.
right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I hear that.
What was that like starting off with D&D campaigns? I feel like you had a little bit of a leg up because you were not that early in your career coaching and facilitation. You said DMing was like 2 years ago, right?
Yeah. I started DMing. Yeah, just under 2 years ago, I think.
You didn't start from nothing.
And I've had 8+ years of coaching, facilitation, training, and I was doing some of that type of stuff even before I was in a career doing it full time. So yeah, it is interesting. And I would say that's probably an element of this for if you're a tabletop RPG fan or if you're a young professional, like you're going to be starting with some transferable skills that'll help you along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's the context that you put yourself in. So, case in point, I was really bad at public speaking in the sense that, like, I got super nervous. I would, not feel confident in what I was going to say. Um, Sometimes I just would freeze up or overthink it. And emotionally, it was just distressing, right? And this is true for most of us. I think with public speaking, right, it's the whole
Yeah.
like public speaking, death, snakes, or
Yeah, which
something.
is the biggest fear,
So
right?
yeah, so I mean, definitely that can be true, but I just sort of, consistent with the rejection proof concept, threw myself onto every stage and in every context where I had to speak up and speak on my feet. I used to be terrible at it. Still feel like there's plenty of room for growth, but I was able to go up that skill level because I just kept training that skill over and over and over. And at one point, I was standing in front of business owners on a monthly basis, and then standing in front of young professionals groups every couple months, and then running a meeting for young professionals every month. And then you add in the D&D, and I was like weekly or every other week, like doing improv. So I had all these opportunities to just speak up and practice thinking on my feet. And it got to the stage where it just became more fluid. So I went from like having to think about things to like suddenly I kind of have a ready answer. I can get to something that's pretty thoughtful pretty quickly because it's just the neural pathways are there on stuff, and I'm more skilled at it and less afraid of it. So I'm not getting like stuck in some of those amateur mistakes, like just freezing up or getting emotionally, frozen or overwhelmed. I'm just able to react a little bit faster.
You bring up neural pathways. You're pointing to, and neither of us is a neuroscientist, but you're pointing to this notion that it becomes easier to do things when you do them repeatedly.
Yeah.
Right? And that's intuitive. When we practice things, they become easier.
Mm-hmm.
But really internalizing that I'm kind of voting for who I'm going to be with the things that I do.
Right.
Like every action is like a little vote. This is who Vance is going to be.
Sure.
And if I put in more votes for the things that I would like to become, I'm becoming it.
Yeah, you're training for that.
You become what you repeatedly do.
Yeah, you're sort
Right.
of that's that whole like thought leads to, words leads to actions, leads to habits, leads to, your destiny, character, your destiny. So there's a bit of a pathway there in terms of what are the types of behaviors that we can do and how do we then reinforce those and make those more identities, or habitual at least.
And I had a similar experience to you with regard to public speaking. Deeply introverted, terrified. I could not make my way through the fifth grade oratory. Could not do it. I was quaking in my boots. Literally could not choke out, this monologue that I was supposed to present. I do public speaking kind of for a living nowadays. It's it's easier, it's lower friction, and like you, I just had all these repeated opportunities or responsibilities to keep doing it.
Yeah.
For me, it started with a foreign English teaching experience where I was kind of thrown into like, this is what I'm doing for money now, and I care about it. I really like helping people reach these aha moments and build their language skills. The public speaking was just incidental, having all these one-on-ones and group classes. But I had my why, which is like, I got to pay rent, and I like doing this work. I like working with the kids and the adults. It was like wide range of students. Um, and then pushing that to further extremes through study programs and fellowships and whatnot, and then professional contexts where it's like, I got to deliver this class, I got to deliver this accelerator. I'm being asked to guest speak on such and such because it's a thing that I'm now an expert in. And then eventually getting to that comfort level. It takes a while, though. I mean, several years in, you're probably still feeling the nerves. You're just like able to.
It depends on the context. So nowadays, if I'm speaking up in front of a young professional audience, I kind of feel like I've hit such a level of expertise, and it resonates so strongly with that identity that I hold of like being a young professional who's there to support young professionals. Very minimal in terms of my fear on that.
You're like 9 years into doing that.
Sure.
I think, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're 2, 3, 4. I mean, there's like a gradient that we have to run through,
sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Where you can still feel the nerves.
Yeah.
For me, I noticed this inflection point where I would teach, a segment on design thinking or entrepreneurship, and I would be kicking myself a little bit, like, I'm not really nervous in here.
Yeah.
I would just be feeling the nerves.
The body. Yeah.
Like,
It's more
I know
of an
what
emotion.
I'm going to say. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just have the buzz.
Yeah.
And
sure.
like it too antsy. Like, can I get this over with almost? All right. But in my head, I was fully prepared and not really worried about it.
Sure. Interesting. Yeah, I'm trying to think about, do I get that kind of buzz anymore? And I'd say there's the ever so slight bit of like nervousness or anxiety sometimes that goes away almost instantly once I start talking with people. And even then, it's not so much that I'm consciously thinking about it or paralyzed by it, maybe except in rare circumstances where it's like a group of young professionals I don't really know, or it's usually worse when it's like what I perceive might not be such a welcoming audience. And because young professionals are kind of like my focus area, if the room's under 40 in general, like I'm very comfortable, I'm happy to be speaking to them, like I'm actually excited, and that's generally how that's coming out,
right,
in terms of my emotions and my energy. And yeah, if it's a mixed room or someone who's like, let's say I was doing a presentation to a group of business owners, even that, because I did that 3 months ago, I hosted a lunch for business owners and I felt very comfortable.
Yeah.
Granted, a lot of them were startup business owners, so I don't know what would kind of make me overthink and be concerned. Maybe it would be a room full of Fortune 500 CEOs or something.
To raise the stakes somehow,
I guess. I don't know. Like, in a sense, in the D&D world, right? Like if I've moved up the level progression, and I'm not just doing like fireballs now, but I can do like disintegrate level 11, player character level. Like this is like up to 100 force damage in a single turn on someone. Like you're kind of at a level now where like the smaller stuff's just not going to get you so much.
Yeah.
And it's the like, okay, I'm going up against Strahd here, or like some other big bad guy, right? That's like going to be the reason for anxiety or the reason for concern. So
right.
I'm honestly, this is helpful for me because I'm thinking about what are those contexts where I can get to the place where I am intimidated or I'm in my head about trying to have the conversation. Because again, my work is essentially conversations. That's what coaching is and trainings are. And so I have put a lot of time and energy and identity into being a conversationalist. And if I'm thinking about that in the context of sales, maybe like sales are conversations too. And generally I'm doing more listening than I am talking.
Yeah.
And so like it's transferable. And I think that's where, probably the next frontier for me would be in terms of like higher level sales opportunities and or stages that are outside of the like 50 people and less zone for me.
Yeah.
Like if
You
I'm
kind of run
speaking in front
through.
of a 400 person audience, I've done that before, but
Yeah.
like that isn't part of my regular routine. So that might be a little bit of a like a
So get a little jolt.
yeah,
A
like
buzz.
yeah, like yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I might have 400 people watch a video that I do on
Doesn't
the
feel the same.
regular, but it's not the same because I'm not seeing 400 people staring at me,
Right.
kind of thing.
But raising the stakes, do you want to raise, the challenge? I'd say I'm in a similar place at this point. There's not a lot of context where I'm really gonna struggle too hard, even if you make the audience enormous at this point. The public speaking muscle has been built enough. But I think there are some contexts, like selling for me is still going to be a source of nerves, of trepidation. Like
Sure.
it's way easier for me emotionally
Yep.
to offer something, to be like, how can I help you? That muscle's fine. Can I, ask questions about just being curious and wanting to learn about someone's business or their career? That's totally fine. I
Yeah.
can flex that muscle any time of day.
Sure.
But if I want to do cold outreach to people
Sure.
and ask for their money,
Yeah.
that's still going to hit me in the jellies.
Well, and that's what I'm doing now, but I've reframed that to talk about it as if, let me offer you support, let me resource you, let me show up and
Yeah.
listen, consult, and care.
Right.
And so like I think part of that is mindset, part of that is aligning it with your skill set. And I would assume that some of the best coaches have versatility in how they can have those conversations. So can you be direct? Can you make an ask? Can you be quiet after you say your price? Right. But also, because a lot of what I'm doing is relationship oriented, there's a saying in the professional services space that professional services are bought and not sold. And so like, people are going to make a decision to buy it. You can't push them into it like you're pushing a rope if you try. So you're really just kind of presenting an opportunity, leaving them the choice, and giving them the incentives or the structure around which they would want to say yes. It's that whole irresistible offer thing we sometimes talk about.
It's a good reframe. And it comes back to that building self esteem again, sense of security. Because in order to have that reframe, that I'm here to avail myself to help you accomplish XYZ,
Yeah.
I've got to believe that I can help you accomplish XYZ.
Yeah. Right.
I need to see proof of that. I need to have some evidence in my memory bank that I can draw from of like, yeah, I can deliver on these things.
Sure. And like, as a young professional, you might be newer to some of these types of skills that you're employing. And so you'll feel a bit of imposter syndrome. I would say even once you've been doing it for almost 10 years, right? Like there still can be some imposter syndrome there. But in general, you have a sense of confidence. And here's one of the things, maybe this isn't how other people think, but like sometimes I'll think about if I had someone like me helping me, right?
Yeah.
Like that would be really wonderful. That'd be really valuable. Like I think I've built enough self-confidence and self-esteem to know that like I'm able to provide real value. And maybe part of that is every time I end a coaching session, I ask them what was valuable, and invariably they'll say something was valuable, right? So I'm getting constant reinforcement that the conversations that I'm having are valuable. And again, if I would want to work with someone like me, well, that's probably a pretty good start to asking someone else to want to work with me.
Yeah.
I'll add one other thought to the self-esteem piece, which is that Dr. Kristen Neff talks about self-compassion as being more powerful than self-esteem.
Okay.
Self-esteem can sometimes lead us to be sort of egocentric or even narcissistic because we're just kind of like focused on me and how I'm doing. But self-compassion is to say, well, let me treat myself kindly, like I would to a friend.
Yeah.
And for those of us who might have been raised in contexts that were, challenging, emotionally, the whole advent of emotional intelligence wasn't even, for many of us that long ago, right? 1995 is when the book came out, right? So if we didn't have a lot of emotional intelligence in our family experience growing up, understandably, then that means that the idea of being self-compassionate and not kind of critical towards ourselves might not be natural. So for me, part of the inner work that I had to do was to figure out where is this critical voice coming from, right? And like, how do I reframe it so that it's not, wow, Zachary, that was so stupid, but to like be kind to myself even when I'm under pressure, under stress, and like feeling upset.
So we're back to something that we touched on
Sure.
last conversation.
Yeah.
Trauma and healing.
Yeah.
And career growth and D&D.
Sure.
We're weaving this thread through.
Yeah.
All right, like plink, plink, plink. I see all the dots. So video games. I mentioned how video games were kind of a haven in an unsafe environment, and I think that's a pretty common experience for a lot of folks. It may not be video games, but some sort of escape.
Yeah.
It could be a friend group. It could be another hobby.
Mm-hmm.
It could be tabletop. But you have this sort of escape where you're able to see the I can moments. But as you were talking about the kindness, like self-compassion, it made me think of how in a video game or a tabletop campaign, you're going to have these non-playable characters, NPCs, who are constantly giving you that reinforcement. You run through a story campaign, and every time you finish a quest, they're like, "Yay! Look at you! You're so amazing!" You know,
Right.
like you're getting,
That's true.
you're being handed the healthier, positive inner dialogue
Sure.
that you might not have had earlier.
Yeah.
You're finding it somewhere.
Right. Even if it's just the NPC you pass in Whiterun saying, "Wow, it's a great day with you around." Right?
Like, I'll take what I can get.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
that's a low bar, but it
yeah.
could be, it can be a starting place for some people.
Yeah. Well, and part of that, I'm realizing I'm doing more work in this regard, but to build positive relationships with yourself and with others,
Mm-hmm.
to carry forward that culture of appreciation and
Yeah.
to look for things to appreciate about people, like that is huge. And if I can appreciate parts about myself and see where I did that well, I mean, this is essentially the work of reparenting that a lot of us realize we've been thrown into when we have our own kids, or even if before we have our own kids, like we need to reparent ourselves.
Yeah.
And to do that in a way that's kind. And what I would be thrilled and interested to play in a D&D context is if someone sort of took that like internal journey of like healing from trauma or something and turned that into a campaign that you're running where you're like diving into like core memories or something and traversing those. Like I think there's a lot of opportunity there if there was someone who was good at writing those types of campaigns and who'd done a lot of the internal work to kind of map out what that could look like. Because in my experience, like the parts work that I was doing for internal family systems, it gets very imaginative, and it's very much like you're going in back into those traumatic memories and rewriting them through storytelling.
So jargon alert, we just brought up a phrase. Was it internal family systems?
Yes.
What is that?
Yeah, so that's a modality within therapy that is helping you to see how to talk with yourself. So as opposed to an external family system, hey, who is my mother, father, brother, sister, right? Like an internal family system is essentially like, who are those parts inside of me that are having conversations within me about what it is that I'm doing? So for me, like I might have an entrepreneur part, I might have a strategist part, I might have an anxious part, right? And each of those parts are having conversations. Those aren't me, but they're parts of me, typically parts of me that kind of evolve to protect me. And then the authentic self, like my real energy and who I am, is supposed to be driving the wheel and listening to those voices as sort of like internal counsel, and then not actually just letting them jump. Yes, it's very much inside out. Yes. Yeah. Except instead of it being emotions, which is inside out framing, it's more of these kinds of parts of you, which you might even imagine like roles that are protectors. People, they're like exactly like any kind of role that you would put on. And sometimes it can be emotions, but parts is the term for it.
Okay.
In coaching language, it's sages and saboteurs.
PQ, right?
Yes,
I've heard this framing as
positive
well.
intelligence. Yeah, okay. Coach Shirzad, I think is how you pronounce his name.
Yeah.
The book Positive Intelligence. So that one is a little bit like adjacent to this type of modality of therapy, but the book for IFS is No Bad Parts. And the idea that like these internal parts aren't bad, they're just trying to help us survive. And if we are able to understand them and help them to feel safe and in their role, then they're not going to jump over and take the wheel. The anxious part isn't going to dominate and like put us to sleep. Think almost like Moon Knight, and like you're like going to sleep and these different parts are jumping in. Like that would be more of like an extreme example. I think that's actually like a dissociative identity disorder.
I was about to say, we're not doing
so not
DID.
to that not to that extreme, but there is an element in which like there are these parts of us that'll jump in and take the show, right? Like let's say that I felt ashamed when I failed at the spelling bee. I'm making this up because I don't have this personal experience, but if I failed at the spelling bee and I was like, spelled a really basic word wrong and everyone laughed at me, right? There might be that part in me that says like, hey, like, don't stand up in front of people, right? And it's trying to protect me, right? Because it remembers that trauma. And that's where, maybe it's in third grade that I did that. And there's this 8-year-old part inside of me that's trying to protect me still. Instead of saying, wow, no, you're bad, I never want to see you again. Yeah. It's like whenever that kind of shows up for me again, well, what do I do with that? Do I let that dominate my experience and now I can't public speak ever again? Or does it mean that I can be informed and appreciate the fact that like, hey, I'm feeling fear. That fear is maybe going to hold me back from being able to like speak in front of this group, but like, it's okay. I'm not that age anymore. This is not that context, right? And there's a lot of self-talk and self-dialogue that'll happen to be able to get you to a place of not feeling frozen, stuck, or unable to do that thing that you want to do.
It sounds like there's a lot of work to do, because in that example, you've done the inner reflection and almost investigation, and followed the thread. You're like, I feel this emotion. Where do I feel it? Where is it coming from? What memories is it tied to? That's work.
Yeah, and this is where like I think it would be so cool to play a D&D campaign where you do some of that internal work, because then you're rolling investigation checks and like all sorts of stuff. But no, seriously, I'd say there is a fair amount of internal reflection, and this is why it is in the domain of therapy. You want a skilled and trained therapist, a licensed therapist to actually do that with you. Yeah. And that's why it's one of the modalities in therapy that is oftentimes referenced as being valuable when it comes to healing from trauma. EMDR and IFS are two of the ones that are kind of talked about pretty frequently. EMDR stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing, I believe. And sometimes they'll like actually put like a visor on you and like do like red lights. You can also do it through closing your eyes and just tapping. Yeah. So these are things that you could look for on psychologytoday.com.
I actually experienced EMDR.
Yeah.
For the first time recently.
Yeah.
And like most things, you've got an acronym, you've got some kind of jargon. It's a little bit technical or medical.
Right.
And then you actually experience it and it's just, oh, okay.
Like that's wasn't as daunting or
not daunting, not scary, and it was effective. But basically I had a memory that was unpleasant, and I revisited it with this kind of light tracking game going that was super simple. It's just like say the color of the thing as you're going through it. And you just repeat it a bunch of times. Yeah. And note, like, how do I feel now? How do I feel now? Revisiting the memory. Okay, how do I feel now? And like over the course of maybe that half-hour session, it went from this thing fills me with the like heebie-jeebies. I really don't like it. I feel my heart rate going up. So like half an hour later, I'm like, okay, I can revisit the memory and not really feel a whole lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. So I'll say this because one, I'm glad you had that experience. Two, I think this can be very valuable for a lot of people and they just don't know about it yet. And as young professionals, like we're open to therapy a lot of times. And like, this is a great modality to find an expert in and to do. And, if we're going to go down that road, right, like, and I'll say this from like a career coaching hat, a lot of times we're being held back by a lot of the internal things, and that can include trauma. And so the science behind EMDR, as I understand it, or even IFS, is part of your brain got traumatized and those memories and that stress got trapped in your brain. And so an exercise like that actually helps that brain to release the trauma and pass it to the other side of your brain so that you can essentially not hold that distress in your body anymore. Right? There's a famous book called The Body Keeps the Score, and oftentimes your body remembers or keeps that stress, right? And so if you were to have a way of letting go of that kind of memory and that stress, or de-traumatize that part of yourself, well, you're going to take your distress level from a 10 down to a 2. And I can say personally, from having done this over the course of a couple of years, I identified probably 30 memories, many of which were pretty distressing to me in my past. And I worked through those in EMDR or IFS sessions, and the distress level consistently moved down and down and down to where everything was a 2 or less, which went, basically for me, thank you. It meant mildly discomforting, or mildly uncomfortable, to just like not really an issue anymore. Yeah. And so like that's a huge boost in capacity and an ability to engage in healthy ways going forward. when you've reduced your distress levels, you're just not getting triggered quite as much or as badly. And, well, that doesn't mean that like now it's perfect and I never feel distress anymore, right? Like I'm at least not triggered and uh, controlled by a lot of those past experiences. And this is why I, as a person who values human development and ongoing professional growth, like get both a coach and a therapist. Like you get a maximized input or output in terms of your ability to do things when you have both of those. It's kind
The
of like,
therapist kind of helps you build the capacity.
yeah,
The
for
coach
sure.
helps you use it well,
Sure, for sure.
right?
Exactly.
Like I got
So,
to have my foundation.
yep.
That's just I need to be healthy. I got to be present. I got to have healthy self-love,
Yeah.
self-compassion, healthy self-esteem, and I got to then
Yeah.
optimize it a little bit and say, well,
Right.
how do I perform now?
Right.
I've got this kit, I've got the toolkit, I've got the skills, I've got the confidence. I'm
Yeah.
not held back anymore.
Yep.
Help me utilize that. So that's
Yeah.
the coaching and the therapy
Yeah.
approach.
Combo.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, if you're interested in min-maxing or getting the full potential out of your character, right? Like 5 + 5 doesn't equal 10. It's 5 times 5 equals 25. Like
Yeah.
or 5 to the power of 5. Like you're getting a maximized impact by doing both of those, because therapy helps you look into the past and like take care of those distressing memories and understand why you are triggered or why you are the way that you are. And then coaching helps you live in the present and plan for that future, to get to where you're trying to be.
If you're listening to this, you might wonder why the heck are we on a rabbit hole down into like trauma and therapy, and what does that have to do with Dungeons and Dragons or building my career? Like you're stretching a little bit with that combination, D&D and career planning. Um, we see this so often. Like we're bringing this up because we work with hundreds of CEOs or young professionals, people trying to grow from where they are to where they want to be. And we see it over and over and over again. That's why we're talking about it.
Yeah.
People are held back by stuff in the past to
Yeah.
varying degrees. Like everyone's got different experiences. Not everyone
Right.
has much or the same trauma, but we're held back by something in here most of the time.
Yeah.
That's why this is so relevant.
Yeah. Yeah. It's oftentimes our beliefs and the embodied experiences that are stopping us. Like we've talked about self-limiting beliefs or fixed mindsets in coaching a lot. And like, yeah, if you can get your way of thinking clearer and better, right? But sometimes it's the emotional experiences that hold us back and break us down or keep us not functional. So from a career navigation framework, I like to say, you have to get your mindset and your emotions working well for you and know where you're starting from to then plan for where do I want to go? How do I get there? And then am I making progress along that path? It's kind of the
Know
5-step
yourself.
process. Starts with knowing yourself, but also knowing what parts of you are, either traumatized or dysfunctional or stuck or just, need some repair and support.
And that's scary. I mean, people are they're gonna drop out of the process at that point of, oh
Sure.
gosh, what if I don't want to look too closely at that?
Yeah.
People don't always want to reflect and face and confront and
Yep.
do the emotional work.
And a lot of us have the privilege to not look into that, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
doing fine. We're doing okay. We're
Yeah.
functioning. A lot of times people wake up at big life events, they lose a job, they lose a significant relationship, right? Like those are moments in which you kind of are invited into some of that internal work
Right.
and to get curious about it and see what, where did this come from or what happened here. I've had multiple of those points throughout my life, and I've taken those opportunities to look into it. And it's set me up for, I think, a healthier and better path forward to have actually engaged with that. And I would say that's probably true for almost everyone who engages in that therapeutic process, assuming you have a good fit with a therapist.
Yeah. Like curiosity. And I think with curiosity, there's humility. There's a little bit of like distance. So call it impartiality or detachment.
Sure.
Bring in a Buddhist term here.
Yeah.
Of can I look at what's going on inside me without being what's going on inside me, right? Can I see, oh, I'm feeling anger rather than just becoming the anger?
Yeah.
That giving yourself a little bit of distance. That's what Viktor Frankl talked about in Man's Search for Meaning, is like the space between stimuli and response. Can I build that up a little bit?
Sure.
To just observe? That's it. Just note, observe, get that third person perspective on me that allows you to engage in those things, the critical reflection, so that you can see what are my strengths, like where do I need to improve. It's not judging.
Yeah.
You're not trying to bring in this critical voice and oh, you little, like, none of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's just impartial, like, oh, huh, like I see that, I see this, I see that. Where does that come from?
Mm-hmm.
Curiosity, um, and gratitude. You brought up gratitude, and that's so
Mm-hmm.
great. I feel like that's one of the superpowers my wife has. Is like I've always admired how much she's able to just feel gratitude
Mm-hmm.
in any given moment. Like find
Yeah.
the reason to be grateful
Yeah.
in any given moment. That's such a powerful skill.
Yeah.
You know?
That's great. Yeah, that is something that I think all of us would be better off exercising more and being conscious of, because it is incredibly powerful.
I'm on
Yeah,
like a almost 2,000 day streak with my gratitude journal.
that's amazing.
Thanks. Yeah,
Wow, that's incredible.
yeah. It's quick. Yeah,
Yeah,
every night I find something to be grateful for.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. That's so cool. Yeah, I was thinking, you're talking about what's the connection between like D&D, careers, trauma, right? Like, and you know, from the parts work perspective, if you are imaginatively stepping back into those memories, again, with the help of a trained therapist, it is almost like you are the leveled up main character going back in time to this sort of
Mhm.
like lower level version of you,
Yeah.
sort of like a multiversal travel type experience. And like you get to rewrite that story and those rules in that experience.
Yeah.
And you're kind of bringing the full power that you have as your level 10, level 20 character, right, to that level 1, level 5 experience of you. And so there's an element of like taking back agency and power and control, and just sort of
Hmm.
resetting it in a way
Hmm.
that sort of tells a story that you can live in, and not letting that be the defining story that still drives you. So, that's a cool piece of that in my experience of having done that work in therapy. And I think that there is an element of this kind of imaginative storytelling and play that's shot through careers, if done well, because you're thinking about who would I be in 5 years? Who would I be if I branched out and did 3 different versions of me in 5 years, right? The Odyssey plans from Bill Burnett's and Dave
Hmm.
Evans' book,
Yeah.
Designing Your Life. And, a lot of that imagination doesn't come naturally for everyone, right? I would say that maybe we'll call it 5 to 10% of us, it comes pretty naturally, but maybe for most of us, it doesn't. And that's where working with someone who can help you through that, whether it's a friend, whether it's a coach, whether it's a mentor, right? Like they can help you to think through what does that look like,
Yeah.
because everyone can figure out that everyone loves stories and like is willing to
It's
listen to
not
a story.
difficult. It
It's
just
not
may not
difficult.
be like your default.
It's not your default mode
Yeah.
or skill set, and sometimes an assist from
To
someone
imagine
else.
your future
Yeah, someone else
vision.
can do that.
Yeah.
So that's where you have people like us who are like really skilled at that. We love doing it. We've done it for ourselves. We're doing that for others frequently.
Yeah.
So we have the ability to do that for others. And whether you're getting that in a group coaching context or they're getting that in a one-on-one mentorship, whatever the case is, like the sad part is when you don't explore imaginatively where you could be,
Yeah.
right? Because then you're not doing any career planning, no career navigation. I mean, gosh, I wish that more managers were trained how to do this with their direct reports, because as young professionals, like we're not even told like sometimes, hey, where do you want to be? What's your next job that you want to have? How can I help you get there? Right? Like that's the exception and not the rule. And I'm hoping that, especially with our generation, as we grow up, as we become, more managers, more executives, like we bring that culture and that tone, and there's going to be an easier way for those who come after us to be able to say like, yeah, like I don't have to hide the fact that this is not a good long-term fit for me. And like as actually one person I was talking with today who's in the talent development field, he was like, our philosophy is we're going to help you grow up or grow out.
Hmm.
And like, gosh, wouldn't that be great if more organizations were developing people, even if it meant that they were growing out of the
Yeah. No
organization?
trap. Right? You're not
Yeah,
gonna be stuck.
yeah,
Yeah. I had that with my company. We were hiring interns and part-time employees, and we were a very early stage company. So back in like 2020, as we were building our team, our plan was to graduate the people we hired.
yeah.
And it's like we don't have the funds to be building up this full-time staff around us,
Mm-hmm.
but we can give you really good experiences, and you can provide a lot of value and have ownership over these projects and creative control, and then graduate out. And so I was very happy to see that even in the midst of like going through the pandemic and hitting these ups and downs of my business, my employees and interns were able to graduate out, and everyone ended up in like an awesome, even higher, stronger position in their
Mm-hmm.
career.
Yeah,
That's what I wanted.
Hmm.
But that was like the mindset going in, is I'm not trying to like keep you here and I want to get as much time out of you as possible. I want to get as much work out of you as possible. That was no
Sure.
way.
Yeah.
Like this has to be win-win,
Yeah.
right? You've got to get something out of this role. You brought up taking control
Hmm.
as something that we will do in response to trauma. Oftentimes, a trauma will involve some kind of loss of control or
Sure.
loss of agency.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That's probably where, especially if the trauma is from abuse, like typically you're losing control, and that's, or agency.
yeah. So we don't have to be, mired in those moments right now, but thinking about what we do in response, that taking control pattern, I think you can see that show up all over the place. Like at the
Mhm.
personal level, it can be body modifications. It can lead to unhealthy things like eating disorders as a
Sure.
way to take really strict control of our bodies. And I think what we're trying to talk through and kind of offer here is like there's healthier ways to take control. There's healthier
Hmm.
ways to get that sense of agency back
Yeah.
and be in the driver's seat and be comfortable in the driver's seat,
Yeah.
feel good in your skin, right?
Right. Yeah. This is not like, um, I'm cutting myself because I'm inflicting pain or
Oh,
something,
yeah,
right? Trigger
yeah,
warning, I guess I should said.
yeah,
But yeah, like there are like ways that I think are very unhealthy to take control, like you mentioned. And then there are healthier ways, like essentially self-management,
yeah,
right? Like how do you manage your habits? How do you manage your thoughts and your, thinking about your thoughts? How do you manage your learning? How do you manage your emotions? So like that, those are types of things that are, I think, the healthy levels of quote unquote control, or being able to exercise your agency in. And you might call that discipline, you might call that self mastery,
yeah.
right? But those are sort of what I'm referring to maybe more in terms of having that control, or that sense of safety is probably another piece of it,
Safety is
especially for
huge.
those of us who may have experienced trauma.
Yeah,
And trauma, I mean, it comes in all shapes and sizes, right? Like all of us probably went through trauma in the pandemic. A lot of us have experienced financial trauma or other
yeah,
types of things. So, you know, to have that sense of safety, I think is really key and important, and something that we can cultivate, um, beyond just the externals. I think that's an internal lived experience as well.
yeah. You want to cultivate safe spaces. I know the phrase safe space gets, distorted or put through different filters, but just look at it literally.
Yeah.
A space that is safe to be in.
Yeah.
That's pretty important.
Yeah.
Right? Make sure your house, your head is a safe space to be in.
Sure.
Right. Um, so why D&D? Why career coaching? Why this intersection business, careers, D&D? I think that the fantasy element with D&D is such an easy, accessible way to build a safe space
Hmm.
and experience power and agency and freedom and control in, like, boom, you're there.
Exploration and fun. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Like, and it's a form of play,
yeah.
right? And like for those of us who maybe aren't getting enough play, right? Like it's one of the things we can do is, play Baldur's Gate 3, find a D&D game if you can find a DM,
Yeah,
right? Like, um, you know, and the idea and way in which the play intersects with this professionally is, maybe I want to be that more charismatic type of character that my player character, my main is. Well, then, yeah, what would it look like to actually cultivate those skills? I mean, one of the like lifetime skills that I think almost every young professional is going to benefit from gaining is if you go into some sort of sales job, gain some sales skills. We're always selling our
thicken your
ideas,
skin, right?
right? We're always advocating for ourselves or for others, right? So like, why not figure out with some skill how to do that? And never mind the fact that if you get good at selling, that can be a very lucrative career path as well.
Now you talk about transferable skills. Whenever I see a resume, some people will hide like service jobs and restaurant work, hospitality
Mm-hmm.
work. I want to see that.
Yeah.
I was like, you've been through fire. You can put up with bad customers who are
Right.
treating you poorly, who are
Sure.
talking down to you as
Yeah.
if you should be, uh, like a servant to them. You can put up with that and you can be diplomatic through that. You've got thickened skin. That's super valuable,
Yeah.
right? Super transferable to
Yeah.
come from like service industry, restaurant
Yeah.
hospitality places.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And never mind that the healthiest cultures that I see organizationally, they aren't like, oh, we're at the top, we're at the most powerful place. They invert the triangle and they say, like, we're the servant leaders. We're the ones who are at the bottom here supporting the rest of the organization. And I think that reframe is really powerful.
Yeah.
And, especially in an economy where it's 75, 80% service, right? And 20% products, something like that. Like, we're all serving others. Are we doing that well? Are we doing that from a place of like servant leadership mindset? And if we're not, what can we do to practice that?
So the last topic that I wanted to go through was thinking a little bit about the tools that we can use to think through this.
Yeah.
How do I discover my strengths?
Mm-hmm.
We're in coaching spaces, so we bump into these frameworks all the time, like PQ and Strengths Finder. People will encounter Myers-Briggs. I've got notes on that one. What are some of the frameworks that you think people can start with if they want a little bit of that guidance?
Yeah. So I'll draw a quick distinction between frameworks and assessments. I'll say that
Okay.
like I might think of a framework as like, situational leadership 2, the 4 styles of management, where you're, starting with direction, moving to coaching, to support, and then to delegation, right? Like, that's an example from Ken Blanchard's book, Leadership and the 1 Minute Manager, of a framework that you can use to help you think about how you can do stuff. Same thing, emotional intelligence. What are the 4 domains of emotional intelligence? Well, self-awareness, self-management, others awareness, and relationship management. So, like, again, framework, I'm looking at it, maybe it lives on a 2x2 box grid, right? But assessments, I would say, serve a similar function in that they're helping us to kind of think about who we are, or the skills that we have, or our personality, or so forth. So I'll kind of think about this in the level of like 3 different levels. Like, you can think of a tree, for example. Trees have leaves, and those leaves can change. That's more at the level of behaviors. So your behaviors can change a lot, right? And that's easy. If I say raise your hand, you can raise your hand. That's a behavior, right? You can do that. Oftentimes we can change our behaviors like that. It doesn't take any energy. Personality is more the trunk of the tree, or the bark, right? Like, that's kind of pretty core to who we are. We're not going to really see a lot of change there, but you can go even deeper, and that's into the roots. And that's where you get to the beliefs that drive you and your core values. And so those are the pieces that like are going to be true whether you're 12 or 92. And so I would say when I think about assessments, I'll put them kind of on one of those 3 layers.
Of which thing are they assessing?
Of, yeah,
My beliefs, my personality, or my
exactly.
behaviors?
So like, I'll run values assessments or core values assessments, and that's at the level of beliefs.
Okay.
For personality, that's more like Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, even the 4 tendencies that I talk about a lot. DISC is actually at the level of behaviors, which is actually it's a misunderstanding. A lot of people think of it as like personality based, but it describes the behaviors. Are you active and task oriented? Are you active and people oriented? Are you reflective and people oriented? Are you reflective and task oriented? And that goes down into the roots or into the trunk of that, right? But what's exhibited, or what it assesses and shows, are the behaviors. And again, I can change those behaviors. The catch is, it costs me energy to change those behaviors.
Yeah, it's not
in
really
the short
easy,
term.
especially if you got a
in the
habit,
short term. Right?
So
exactly. So that's why it's still useful to know that yes, I have a reflective personality and I prefer working with people. Right? That means I have the steady style, the S style on the DISC. Right? But that means that I also, like, I can switch hats and I can go into that D, commanding, like high activity, high task orientation if I need to. It's just going to be at a high energy cost. I won't be able to sustain that for long, at least until I've built the neural pathways and I've practiced that over time, and I can kind of do that. For me, I kind of saw a pretty marked shift when I became a new parent, because we didn't have enough support and a lot of tasks were required. So I went from being people and reflective to being much more like task oriented and a bit more active. And would I like to stay in that territory and exhibit those behaviors? No, it's kind of exhausting. I'd love to sit in the space where I'm more reflective and able to be more with people. But like, season of life, I'm having to kind of push myself a lot. And it takes more energy and I'm more exhausted at the end of the day, but I can shift my set of behaviors even, because it's needed. And that's sort of something that a lot of the DISC assessments will show you is, you have your natural style and your adaptive style.
I think maybe our next conversation should be on alignment.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? Like the consistency of the story that we tell about ourselves.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That sounds great. I love the topic of alignment.
Because one of my favorite things is low friction entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And I hope that term takes off somewhere, because I'm an advocate for low friction entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And to get to low friction entrepreneurship, You've
Strong
got to be
alignment.
doing the things that are low friction.
Right.
Like you were talking about, if it's easier for me to do this and it's really high energy, I can do it, but it's really high energy to do that. I want to try to build a business, a job, a role that allows me to spend most of my time doing the thing over here.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that kind of goes down into the roots of this. So while the disc does show what are the behaviors, another really helpful assessment that's not as common is called the Core Values Index by Tailored Protocols, and they talk about 4 archetypes. You've got the builder, that's really like kind of using my personal energy to like go and conquer things and do things. I think Alexander the Great, right? You've got the merchant, who's like using their love, not their power, right? Their love to like build connections and talk to people and support others, right? I think Marco Polo creating new trade routes, right, across the world. Then you've got your innovator, and that's someone who is, like a Leonardo da Vinci. They're constantly coming up with new ideas, new solutions, right? Like that's easy for them. And then you've got your banker, and this is more of like, in the caveman days, right? If someone was like banking the coals so that you could protect those and restart the fire later, right? They're the ones who care more about knowledge than wisdom. Well, innovators care more about wisdom, and that's their core value. And so the lesson from the Core Values Index is that doesn't change over your lifetime. And when you know what your map is, for example, I'm an innovator merchant, so I care about wisdom and love more than I do about power or knowledge. I got to partner with the people who are the power knowledge people, right? Because
Yeah, get the
long term,
complementary.
I need a
Yeah,
complement in order to run my business well.
don't get redundant teams around you. Get the
Yeah,
people who have strengths where you have weaknesses. Yeah.
yeah, because that won't.
So
Yeah, that won't
I was
change.
trying to ask, what is a framework that people could start with, and I ended up learning like 3 more.
5 or 6, or
Yeah.
yeah.
What's a good starting point for someone who wants to figure out what they're good at,
Yeah. Okay.
or core values? Or where should they start?
Yeah. So
Values.
yeah. So again, like from a model standpoint, I would say you can start in terms of like your skills, your interests, like the job that you're doing, and it can go all the way down to the bottom of like, why am I here on this earth? What work am I trying to accomplish? And even like underneath that, like what are the beliefs and presuppositions that I hold that are driving me forward? So you can kind of along that spectrum go, should I look at my job? Should I look at the organization and culture fit? Should I look at the industry that I want to do, the career path that I want to be on, like my purpose for my work, my purpose for my life, the beliefs that underpin that? I might suggest start at the top because it's practical and you can use the skills that you have to actually drive forward into a direction for your career. So SkillScan, one of the assessments that I've been certified in, that I've been using for almost 10 years now, it's a great assessment. It helps you to see out of the 6 skill categories which are the ones that you tend to do best. And then it takes those individual skills, 9 skills per category, and breaks those into 3 major skill sets per skill category. So that was a lot of math. 54 skills grouped into 18 skill sets out of 6 categories. And you're going to end up knowing what your top 3 to 6 of those are typically in terms of skill sets. And that's where you find the alignment between the skills that you have that you enjoy using and you want to use in your career going forward, what you're proficient in or good at, right? And then you map that to an industry that needs that type of skill set.
And I want to highlight, a lot of these are products.
Sure.
Right? Like StrengthsFinder is a thing you can pay for.
Yes.
SkillScan is a thing you can pay for. Disc assessments is an industry. Like, it doesn't really matter what products you use. It matters if it helps.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Right.
we don't really care what you
Sure.
do. We just want it to stick.
Yeah.
So I think people like us, we're gonna maybe suggest, here's like 6 different things that you could approach. I don't care which one you do. I
Sure.
just want to see if one of them is going to stick for you.
Yeah, exactly.
I want the results for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does this help you understand yourself in a meaningful way?
Yeah.
That's what we're looking for.
And there are many ways to develop yourself and many ways to assess and then get that self-awareness. So like take more assessments. Like there's some that are free if you're looking for some free starting places. 16 Personalities is like the Myers-Briggs free edition, right? The 4 Tendencies that I really like, How You Manage Expectations. That's a surprisingly powerful one by Gretchen Rubin. That's free. You can take a DISC assessment for free. The Enneagram, some people really love. That's 9 different types of personality that all have kind of like some facets to it. So it's 9 or 27, depending on if you're doing like the core type or you include one of the wings or have like no wing really. And yeah, I found that many people gravitate to one or the other, and some people really advocate for like, nope, the Enneagram's the best, or no, you have to take the DISC, right? Corporate culture, DISC is probably most common. If you're in sort of like a religious circle or Christian culture, Enneagram's probably one you've heard of. If you're in, business executive culture, maybe you've heard of the Core Values Index, and almost everyone's heard of like the Myers-Briggs. Maybe you haven't heard of the complementary strong interest profile, but like Myers-Briggs and strong are typically combined to help like your personality and your interests and stuff. So yeah, again, there's lots of stuff out there.
Yeah.
If you're a student, go talk to your career services people. They'll have some assessments. If you're a high school student, right, talk to your career services people. They'll have something. And if you are just an adult and just an adult working somewhere, you don't have like kind of like a professional development or learning and development team member at your organization, talk to your friends who do, or talk to
someone will know.
Reach out to us.
Right?
Yeah.
Ask and people will send you somewhere.
Just Google search or use your favorite generative AI tool and like, what assessments can I take for free? This is not hard.
So coming soon, we're working on a fun one.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not going to talk at length about this. We're doing this for D&D. Like, why not? Why not look at the 12 classes? We're going to deep dive into each of those 12 classes and what that could mean as a fun lens for understanding yourself
in your career.
So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
And I can give a piece of homework for anybody who would like a little bit of self-discovery right now. And I assign this to basically everyone who I work with. It'll be one of the first things I want you to do is sit under your tree, metaphorically or literally, and think back to all the times that you experienced flow state. So flow state, if that term is new for you, is just the experience of less friction doing stuff. Generally, people will say, I lost track of time if I'm experiencing flow state. Like I was doing this and it was work, but it didn't feel like work. So the stuff that makes you think didn't feel like work or lost track of time, right? I was able to focus. I have a hard time focusing on other stuff. I could focus on this. That might be flow state. If you just think through and jot down on a pad of paper or whatever, these are moments that I felt flow state, right? School, work, leisure activity. I don't care about the context. Just look for those moments.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really strong starting place to see, a little bit of a pattern in the things that I like to do, the things that are going to be low friction for me.
Yeah. Low friction, low energy costs, like you lose track of time. I think it's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi or something is how you pronounce his name, but he's the one that kind of coined that concept of flow and talks about that. And I think that that's a really big key is understanding that. I would say too, like as a complementary framework for this, what I'll call the growth zone, it's sort of like we live on a spectrum of the kind of work that we're doing, from everything from like atrophy and boredom to like complacency, learning, growth, overwhelm, chaos.
Yeah.
And like, if you think about it as almost like planetary alignment, right? Like if you go way too far out into the chaos, like that's not habitable, right? But if you go way too far in towards boredom and atrophy, that's also not habitable. You really want to be in the zone where you're either comfortable, learning, or growing, maybe a little bit overwhelmed. Typically the growth edge is like where I'm like growing and I'm almost overwhelmed, but I'm still able to handle it. Yeah. And that gets pushed out and you have more capacity over time.
Simplest way to frame that is you've got flow, and on either side of it, you have boredom and frustration.
Yeah.
And the thing that changes is difficulty.
Yeah.
Like tune the difficulty of the task. It's got to be challenging enough for flow. If it's too challenging, it's frustrating. If it's not challenging enough, boring.
And to close this as a DM, I would say that's the goal for you when you're working with your players, right? Is like you want to provide enough of a challenge to where you're not TPKing the party, you're not overwhelming them, like you're not, but you're also not giving them like a session that's like, what did we even do? Like this is so boring, right? Like you want to have those meaningful challenges, and that's good game design, but that's also good life design. And I think that a lot of times as we try to design our lives and our careers, we need to find what are the appropriate challenges, what are the skills that I'm currently developing, what parts of myself am I becoming more self-aware around, right? And like, what am I doing to grow? And then give yourself grace too, because you might have gone through a really intense season where it was overwhelming or you were growing a lot, and you need to pull back on that and get some of that like comfort and boredom for a time until you're ready to go back to your growth edge.
Yeah. You don't always need to be in the same spot. Is a good point, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for this.
Thank you.
Yeah,
This was a great
great
conversation once again.
conversation. And if you've been listening all the way through, holy cow, thank you so much. And we'll have more for you.
That's great. Sounds good. Thanks, Vance.